At Asian Society, which is an NGO, we're headquartered in New York. We have offices around the United States and Asia as well. We do spend a lot of time in investigating professional learning systems for practicing teachers in the United States and East Asia, including Singapore. And at the risk of grossly oversimplifying, but I think echoing some of the things that Andrea Schlager said, I would say that in Asia, time for professional learning is substantial. It's deeply embedded in the daily practice of teachers. It's characterized by well-organized collaborative inquiry involving a high degree of transparency of practice where constructive feedback by peers is both expected and welcomed. And it is focused systematically on improving practice to meet a specific need in the school. In contrast, time for professional learning in the United States is very limited. It's more often episodic and event-driven than in being embedded in daily work. It often revolves around an individual teacher pursuing knowledge and skill development, or if undertaken by groups of teachers, it more often involves kind of the receipt of information rather than collaborative inquiry to construct understanding. And perhaps most importantly from our perspective, it doesn't very often involve prolonged deep learning by teachers towards the implementation of a real coordinated system of learning for students, and is often more often focused on discrete skill development. And sadly, but not unpredictably, the least well-organized systems for professional learning are often in school systems serving the most challenged students. So our own work in schools in the United States has been really concentrated in high poverty urban school systems with the explicit purpose of engaging whole faculties of teachers in lower and upper secondary schools in in-depth, systematic, collaborative professional learning to improve student academic performance, but also to improve and to develop students' what we call global competence. Those 21st century complex thinking skills and social and interpersonal skills that young people need to thrive within a global economy, and also to be able to address the intractable global problems that we're all faced with. We work in over 30 schools across 7 different states. 80% of our students are students of color. 2/3 of the students are students who receive free lunch, same sort of marker of poverty. And the average graduation rate across all of our schools is about 91% on-time graduation, which for urban high schools is a pretty high percentage. And so we're doing something that seems to make some difference. And so what I really wanted to show to you in my brief remarks is essentially what we do to bring to a school a kind of system of professional learning in which we engage teachers, and we call that system the graduation performance system. Just to let you know, we're an organization, we don't run schools, we work in schools at their invitation, and so our focus is really on the professional development of teachers in schools that we work in. So at the heart of this system, this GPS system, the graduation performance system that I mentioned, at the heart of it is a clear, measurable articulation of what successful student work looks like, so that it's both clear to teachers and to students, in effect, what the goal of student learning is. And these take the form of a set of performance outcomes and rubrics for each of the core subject areas, as well as a cross-cutting set of competencies we call global leadership skills. So in essence, you have for mathematics and for science, for social studies, for history, language arts, for world languages and the arts, a set of high school graduation outcome objectives that indicate in very measurable terms what student work should look like if it demonstrates global competence. And importantly, these performance outcomes are intentionally aligned to what in the States is called, you've heard it mentioned, the Common Core State Standards, which are a set of standards for student performance in mathematics and literacy, and a related set of standards in science, which are used in many ways to define acceptable levels of student performance. So this is important because in the States, the standardized assessments that are keyed to the Common Core and the science standards are increasingly how student achievement in the US is defined. And again, sadly, but not unpredictably, high poverty communities with high concentrations of students of color are showing major gaps in achievement on these tests relative to more affluent students. So in our work, we very deliberately integrate the development of global competencies with learning to the levels of achievement stipulated in the Common Core. And our hope is to increase the capacity of teachers to prevent an opportunity gap where challenged students don't develop the 21st century skills that really is the ticket for success in an innovation-driven global economy, as well as the more traditional achievement gap with regard to basic knowledge and skills. In addition to the graduation or 12th grade GPS performance outcomes, there are a set of performance outcomes at the 10th, 8th, and 5th grade level that kind of benchmark performance expectations at each of these grade levels, which in effect creates a kind of pathway of clearly defined expectations of student performance over the course of a student's school career, leading to proficiency by graduation. And so anchoring the work in our performance outcomes, what the GPS does is to build teachers' capacity to implement a project-based instruction and performance-based assessment cycle of learning. Teachers learn to design and implement curriculum units that integrate content learning with study of a global problem or issue. So for issues that might range from human rights to infectious diseases to human population growth to hunger and poverty, teachers learn to teach core content knowledge and develop global competencies as they have students wrestle with these highly motivating real-world problems. And it's interesting, research shows that having this kind of meaning of your learning and knowing why you're studying what you're doing in terms of addressing a global issue like this tends to have a greater impact and greater positive impact on disadvantaged students than more affluent students. It's an interesting phenomenon. But what we also teach is we help teachers learn to embed within these units authentic learning experiences and methods of inquiry, as well as formative and summative assessment tasks, performance assessment tasks, essentially tasks that let students show what they know by applying their learning in pursuit of a solution to the world issue at hand. Teachers learn to rate student work produced in response to these curriculum modules based on evidence of proficiency in meeting our GPS performance outcomes as well as the Common Core standards. And teachers do learn to provide very nuanced feedback to students in relation to these standards so that the students know exactly kind of what they need to do to improve. And it is nuanced feedback. It's not just a check of this is good or bad. It's really whether or not there's evidence of reaching a certain performance standard that is very clearly defined. So there's no ambiguity as to what the student needs to do to improve. And these include, not just knowledge, but these more complex thinking skills as well. And it's interesting, the process of student work also helps teachers illuminate patterns of challenge across students so that they themselves can begin to think about how do they change their own teaching practice. What are students not getting that they need to think about and improve their own performance? So all this happens within a 1 to 3 week instruction, assessment, and data cycle. So the GPS performance cycle is in effect a kind of continuous improvement process for both students and for teachers that reframes content learning and assessment within a global context. And then implementing the GPS across the curriculum and across grade levels ultimately results in student portfolios that demonstrate mastery of college and career readiness standards that are represented by the Common Core and the GPS standards for global competence by the time students graduate from high school. So each student has a portfolio and has an exhibition of that portfolio to essentially sort of show what they know in terms of both global competence and career readiness. So that's a very brief glimpse at least one strategy for addressing the very American dilemma of having high levels of underachievement among poor and minority youth and the chronic absence of organized, purpose-driven professional learning for masses of teachers.